The Sino-Burmese War, also known as the Qing invasions of Burma or the Myanmar campaign of the Qing dynasty, was a war fought between the Qing dynasty of China and the Konbaung dynasty of Burma. China under the Qianlong Emperor launched 4 invasions of Burma between 1765 and 1769, which were considered as one of his 10 Great Campaigns. Nonetheless, the war, which claimed the lives of over 70,000 Chinese soldiers and 4 commanders, is sometimes described as the most disastrous frontier war that the Qing dynasty had ever waged, and one that assured Burmese independence. Burma's successful defense laid the foundation for the present-day boundary between the two countries. At first, the emperor envisaged an easy war and sent in only the Green Standard troops stationed in Yunnan. The Qing invasion came as the majority of Burmese forces were deployed in the latest invasion of Siam. Nonetheless, battle-hardened Burmese troops defeated the first 2 invasions of 1765 to 1766 and 1766 to 1767 at the border. The regional conflict now escalated to a major war that involved military maneuvers nationwide in both countries. The third invasion, led by the elite Manchu bannermen, nearly succeeded, penetrating deep into central Burma within a few days' march from the capital, Ava. But the bannermen of northern China could not cope with unfamiliar tropical terrains and lethal endemic diseases, and were driven back with heavy losses. After the close call, King Shenbiushan redeployed his armies from Siam to the Chinese front. The 4th and largest invasion got bogged down at the frontier. With the Qing forces completely encircled, a truce was reached between the field commanders of the two sides in December 1769. The Qing kept a heavy military lineup in the border areas of Yunnan for about 1 decade in an attempt to wage another war while imposing a ban on inter-border trade for 2 decades. The Burmese, too, were preoccupied with the Chinese threat, and kept a series of garrisons along the border. 20 years later, when Burma and China resumed a diplomatic relationship in 1790, the King unilaterally viewed the act as Burmese submission, and claimed victory. Ultimately, the main beneficiaries of this war were the Siamese, who reclaimed most of the territories in the next 3 years after having lost their capital Ayutthaya to the Burmese in 1767. Background: the long border between Burma and China had long been vaguely defined. The Ming dynasty first conquered Yunnan borderlands between 1380 and 1388, and stamped out local resistance by the mid-1440s. The Burmese control of the Shan states came in 1557 when King Baenaung of the Tungu dynasty conquered all of the Shan states. The border was never demarcated in the modern sense, with local Shan-Sorbus at the border regions paying tribute to both sides. The situation turned to China's favor in the 1730s when the king decided to impose a tighter control of Yunnan's border regions, while the Burmese authority largely dissipated with the rapid decline of the Tungu dynasty. Qing consolidation of borderlands. The Qing attempts for tight control of the border were initially met with fierce resistance by the local chiefs. In 1732, the Yunnan government's demand of higher taxes led to several Shan revolts at the border. Shan resistance leaders united people by saying, "The lands and water are our properties. We could plow ourselves and eat our own produces. There is not a need to pay tributes to foreign government." In July 1732, a Shan army, mostly consisted of native mountaineers, laid siege to the Qing garrison at Pua for 90 days. The Yunnan government responded with an overwhelming force numbered around 5,000 and lifted the siege. The Qing army pursued further west but could not put down persistent local resistance. Finally, the Qing field commanders changed the tactics by allying with neutral Sorbwis, granting Qing titles and powers, including Green Standard captainships and regional commanderships. To complete the agreements, the third-ranking officer of Yunnan traveled to see Mao personally and held a ceremony of allegiance. By the mid-1730s, the Sorbwis of the border who used to pay dual tributes were increasingly siding with the more powerful Qing. By 1735, the year which the Qianlong Emperor ascended the Chinese throne, 10 Sorbwis had sided with the Qing. The annexed border states ranged from Mogarong and Bamo in present-day Kachin State to Hscnwi State and Kengtung State in present-day Shan State, to Sipsong Pana in present-day Zhishuangban Dai Autonomous Prefecture, Yunnan. While the Qing were consolidating the hold at the border, the Tungu dynasty was faced with multiple external raids and internal rebellions and could not take any reciprocal action. Throughout the 1730s, the dynasty faced Manipuri raids that reached increasingly deeper parts of Upper Burma. In 1740, the Mon of Lower Burma revolted and founded the restored Hanthawaddy Kingdom. By the mid-1740s, the authority of the Burmese king had largely dissipated. In 1752, the Tungu dynasty was toppled by the forces of restored Hanthawaddy which captured Ava. By then, the king control of the former borderlands was unquestioned. In 1752, the emperor issued a manuscript, King Imperial Illustration of Tributaries, saying that all barbarian tribes under his rule must be studied and reported the natures and cultures back to Beijing. Burmese Reassertion. In 1752, a new dynasty called Konbaung rose to challenge restored Hanthawaddy, and went on to reunite much of the kingdom by 1758. In 1758–59, King Alongpaya, the founder of the dynasty, sent an expedition to the farther Shan states, which had been annexed by the king over 2 decades earlier, to re-establish Burmese authority. 3 of the 10 farther Shan states, Sorbwis and the militias, reportedly ran away into Yunnan and tried to persuade Qing officials to invade Burma. The nephew of Kengtung Sorbwa and his followers also fled. The Yunnan government reported the news to the emperor in 1759, and the king court promptly issued an imperial edict ordering reconquest. At first, the Yunnan officials, who believed that barbarians must be conquered using barbarians, tried to resolve the matter by supporting the defected Sorbwis. But the strategy did not work. In 1764, a Burmese army, which was on its way to Siam, was increasing its grip of the borderlands, and the Sorbwis complained to China. In response, the emperor appointed Lu Zhao, a respected scholarly minister from the capital, to sort out the matters. At Kunming, Lu assessed that the use of Taishan militias alone was not working, and that he needed to commit regular Green Standard Army troops. First invasion. In early 1765, a 20,000-strong Burmese army stationed at Kengtung, led by Gen. Myo Thiphapat, left Kengtung for yet another Burmese invasion of Siam. With the main Burmese army gone, Lu used a few minor trade disputes between local Chinese and Burmese merchants as the excuse to order an invasion of Kengtung in December 1765. The invasion force, which consisted of 3,500 Green Standard troops along with Taishan militias, laid siege to Kengtung but could not match battle-hardened Burmese troops at the Kengtung garrison, led by Gen. Myo Sibu. The Burmese lifted the siege and pursued the invaders into Pua Prefecture, and defeated them there. Myo Sibu left a reinforced garrison, and returned to Ava in April 1766. Governor Lu, in his embarrassment, first tried to conceal what had happened. When the emperor became suspicious, he ordered Liu's immediate recall and demotion. Instead of complying, Lu committed suicide suicide by slicing his throat with a stationary knife, writing as blood was pouring from his neck, "There is no way to pay back the emperor's favor. I deserve death with my crime." While this kind of suicide in the face of bureaucratic failure apparently was not unusual in Qing China, it reportedly enraged the emperor nonetheless. Sorting out the mean was now a matter of imperial prestige. The emperor now appointed Yang Yingzhu, an experienced frontier officer with long service in Xinjiang and Guangzhou. Second invasion. Zhang arrived in the summer of 1766 to take command. Unlike Liu's invasion of Kangtung, located far away from the Burmese heartland, Zhang was determined to strike Upper Burma directly. He reportedly planned to place a king claimant on the Burmese throne. Zhang's planned path of invasion was via Bamo and down the Irrawaddy River to Ava. The Burmese knew the route of invasion in advance and were prepared. Shun Biushan's plan was to lure the Chinese into Burmese territory, and then surround them. The Burmese commander in the field Balumindam was ordered to give up Bamo, and instead stay at the Burmese stockade at Ka'ungtan, a few miles south of Bamo on the Irrawaddy. The Ka'ungtan fort had been especially equipped with the cannon corps led by the French gunners to reinforce them. Another army led by Mahathi Hathera and posted at the easternmost Burmese garrison at Konbaung, was ordered to march to the Bamo theatre across the northern Shan states. Trap at Bamo Ka'ungtan. As planned, the Qing troops easily captured Bamo in December 1766 and established a supply base. The Chinese then proceeded to lay siege to the Burmese garrison at Ka'ungtan. But Balumindam's defenses held off repeated Chinese assaults. Meanwhile, two Burmese armies, one led by Mahasathu and another led by Nyamyosathu, surrounded the Chinese. Mahathi Hathera's army also arrived and took position near Bamo to block the escape route back to Yunnan. The impasse did not favor the Chinese troops, who were utterly unprepared to fight in the tropical weather of Upper Burma. Thousands of Chinese soldiers reportedly were struck down by cholera, dysentery and malaria. One Qing report stated that 800 out of 1,000 soldiers in one garrison had died of disease, and that another 100 were ill. With the Chinese army greatly weakened, the Burmese then launched their offensive. First, Nyamyosathu easily retook the lightly held Bamo. The main Chinese army was now totally holed up in the Ka'ungtan-Bamo corridor, cut off from all supplies. The Burmese then proceeded to attack the main Chinese army from two sides: Balumindam's army out of Ka'ungtan fortress, and Nyamyosathu's army from the north. The Chinese retreated eastwards and then northwards, where another Burmese army led by Mahathi Hathera was waiting. The two other Burmese armies also followed up, and the Chinese army was destroyed entirely. Mahasathu's army, which had been guarding the western flank of the Irrawaddy, then marched north of Mayat-Kiana and defeated lightly held other Chinese garrisons at the border. The Burmese armies proceeded to occupy 8 Chinese Shan states within Yunnan. Aftermath: victorious Burmese armies returned to Ava with the captured guns, muskets and prisoners in early May. At Kunming, Zhang began resorting to lies. He reported that Bamo had been occupied, that its inhabitants had begun wearing Manchu-style pigtails, and that the Burmese commander, Nyamyosathu, after losing 10,000 men, had sued for peace. He recommended that the emperor graciously accept the peace offer to restore the normal trade relations between the two countries. The Qianlong Emperor, however, realized the falsity of the report and ordered Yang back to Beijing. On his arrival, Zhang committed suicide at the order of the emperor. Third invasion. Chinese mobilization. After the two defeats, the emperor and his court could not comprehend how a relatively small, barbaric country like Burma could resist the might of the king. For the emperor, it was time for the Manchus themselves to come into the picture. He had always doubted the battle-worthiness of his Chinese green standard armies. The Manchus saw themselves as a warlike and conquering race, and the Chinese as an occupied people. He commissioned a study of the first two invasions, and the report reinforced his biases that the low battle-worthiness of the green standard armies was the reason for the failures. In 1767, the emperor appointed the veteran Manchu commander Ming Rui, a son-in-law of his, as governor-general of Yunnan and Guizhou, and head of the Burma campaign. Ming Rui had seen battle against the Turks in the northwest and was in command of the strategically key post of Ili. His appointment meant that this was no longer a border dispute but a full-fledged war. Ming Rui arrived in Yunnan in April. An invasion force consisted of elite Manchu and Mongol troops were rushed down from northern China and Manchuria. Provinces throughout China were mobilized to provide supplies. This force was to be accompanied by thousands of green standards from Yunnan and Taishan militias. The strength of the total invasion force was 50,000 men, the vast majority being infantry. The mountains and thick jungles of Burma kept the use of cavalry forces to a minimum, as a precaution against illness, which the king court now took seriously. The campaign was planned for the winter months when diseases were believed to be less prevalent. Burmese mobilization. The Burmese now faced the largest Chinese army yet mobilized against them. Yet King Shenbiushan did not seem to realize the gravity of the situation. Throughout the first two invasions, he had steadfastly refused to recall the main Burmese armies, which had been battling in Laos and Siam since January 1765, and laying siege to the Siamese capital of Ayutthaya since January 1766. Throughout 1767, when the Chinese were mobilizing for the most serious invasion yet, the Burmese were still focused on defeating the Siamese. Even after the Siamese capital was finally captured in April 1767, Shenbiushan kept part of the troops in Siam during the rainy season months in order to mop up the remaining Siamese resistance during the winter. Months later that year, he actually allowed many Shan and Laotian battalions to demobilize at the start of the rainy season. As a result, when the invasion had come in November 1767, the Burmese defenses had not been upgraded to meet a much larger and a more determined foe. The Burmese command looked much like that of the second invasion. Shenbiushan again assigned the same commanders of the second invasion to face off the Chinese. Maha Seu led the main Burmese army and was the overall commander of the Chinese theater, with Maha Thihathera and Myo Seu commanding two other Burmese armies. Balumindam again commanded the Ka'ungtan fort. Chinese offensive. Ming Rui planned a two-pronged invasion as soon as the rainy season ended. The main Chinese army, led by Ming Rui himself, was to approach Ava through Hscnwi, Lashio and Hsipo, and down the Namtu River. The second army, led by Gen. Edeng, was to try the Bamo route again. The ultimate objective was for both armies to clamp themselves in a pincer action on the Burmese capital of Ava. The Burmese plan was to hold the second Chinese army in the north at Ka'ungtan with the army led by Myo Seu, and meet the main Chinese army in the northeast with two armies led by Maha Seu and Maha Thihathera. At first, everything went according to plan for the king. The third invasion began in November 1767 as the smaller Chinese army attacked and occupied Bamo. Within 8 days, Ming Rui's main army occupied the Shan states of HSCNWI and Hsipur. Ming Rui made HSCNWI a supply base, and assigned 5,000 troops to remain at HSCNWI and guard the rear. He then led a 15,000-strong army in the direction of Ava. In late December, at the Gotek Gorge, the two main armies faced off and the first major battle of the third invasion ensued. Outnumbered 2-1, Maha Seu's main Burmese army was thoroughly routed by Ming Rui's bannermen. Maha Thehathera too was repulsed at HSCNWI. The news of the disaster at Gotek reached Ava. Shunbiushan finally realized the gravity of the situation, and urgently recalled Burmese armies from Siam. Having smashed through the main Burmese army, Ming Rui pressed on full steam ahead, overrunning one town after another, and reached Singyu on the Irrawaddy, 30 miles north of Ava at the beginning of 1768. The only bright spot for the Burmese was that the northern invasion force, which was to come down the Irrawaddy to join up with Ming Rui's main army, had been held off at Konbaung. Burmese counter-attacked Ava. Shunbiushan famously did not panic at the prospect of a large Chinese army at the doorstep. The court urged the king to flee, but he scornfully refused, saying he and his brother princes, sons of Along Palya, would fight the Chinese single-handed if they had to. Instead of defending the capital, Shunbiushan calmly sent an army to take up position outside Singyu, personally leading his men toward the front line. It turned out that Ming Rui had overstretched himself, and was in no position to proceed any farther. He was now too far away from his main supply base at HSCNWI, hundreds of miles away in the northern Shan Hills. The Burmese guerrilla attacks on the long supply lines across the jungles of the Shan Hills were seriously hampering the Qing army's ability to proceed. Ming Rui now resorted to defensive tactics, playing for time to enable the northern army to come to his relief. But it was not to be. The northern army had suffered heavy casualties in the repeated attacks against the Konbaung fort. Its commander, against the express orders of Ming Rui, retreated back to Yunnan. The situation turned worse for Ming Rui. By early 1768, battle-hardened Burmese reinforcements from Siam had begun to arrive back. Bolstered by the reinforcements, two Burmese armies led by Maha Thehathera and Myo Seu succeeded in retaking HSCNWI. The Qing commander at HSCNWI committed suicide. The main Qing army was now cut off from all supplies. It was now March 1768. Thousands of bannermen from the freezing grasslands along the Russian border began dying of malaria, as well as Burmese attacks in the furnace-like hot weather of central Burma. Ming Rui gave up all hope of proceeding toward Ava, and instead tried to make it back to Yunnan with as many of his soldiers as possible. Battle of Myanmar in March 1768. Ming Rui began his retreat, pursued by a Burmese army of 10,000 men and 2,000 cavalry. The Burmese then tried to encircle the Chinese by splitting the army into two. Maha Thehathera had now assumed the overall command, replacing Maha Seu's. The smaller army, led by Maha Seu, continued to pursue Ming Rui, while the larger army, led by Maha Thehathera, advanced through the mountainous route to emerge directly behind the Chinese. Through careful maneuvering, the Burmese managed to achieve complete encirclement of the Chinese at modern-day Bainulwin, about 50 miles northeast of Ava. Over the course of 3 days of bloody fighting, the Bannerman army was completely annihilated. The slaughter was such that the Burmese could hardly grip the swords as the hilts were slippery with enemy blood. Of the original 30,000 men of the main army, only 2,500 remained alive and were captured. The rest had been killed either on the battlefield, through disease or through execution after the surrender. Ming Rui himself was severely wounded in battle. Only a small group managed to break through and escaped the carnage. Ming Rui himself could have escaped with that group. Instead, he cut off his queue and sent it to the emperor as a token of his loyalty by those who were escaping. He then hanged himself on a tree. In the end, only a few dozen of the main army returned.